Welcome back to the Arkopia Show. The title of today's chapter in my series of podcasts is called He with the Infrastructure Wins. And what do I mean by that? You could have lots of skills. You could know how to butcher. You could know how to build. You could know how to raise livestock. But in the end, he with the infrastructure wins. So as a first example, the prices of meat. A lot of small ranchers and large ranchers, I guess, would complain that they only get so much per pound per live weight. So they, build a fence, watch their cows in the field, do a little bit of maintenance and the stuff that goes with that, and feed them and make sure they have water and make sure that they're healthy. And then they sell them, and somebody has to buy that animal, like transport it, butcher it, do all that stuff in a certified facility with all sorts of equipment, have the skills to do that, have the packages to do that, package it, label it, everything, get it to the store, and then it's a super high price when it gets to the grocery store, all the margins and middlemen and things, and the farmer doesn't get very much for his product. I ran into one guy at a wholesale store in my local city, and I was looking at, I forget, they had just bulk chickpeas and peas and lentils and things. I think I was looking at lentils, and I pick up a bag of it and I'm looking at it and thinking like how much per pound it is, whatever. And it's all cleaned, uniform, in a package, completely dried, long term shelf life, everything. And the guy next to me is like, I farm those and I only get this much per bushel or something. I'm like, well, yes, but did you like process, dry, clean, sort, double clean, bag, weigh, measure, ship, label, and do you own the retail store where somebody's going to buy them, and do you own the distribution facility that's going to get them to the retailer stores? Like, it's got to travel thousands of kilometers on average, and it's just a little conversation with him. It's like, yes, yeah, I know you sell it by the dirty grain truck full with some grasshoppers in and things, and getting a finished product to an end customer, there's a lot of steps. And I didn't go this deep into it, obviously, but do you have a facility to clean? Do you have a facility to process and package and weigh and label and all this stuff? And he doesn't. He has a farming machine. He puts seeds in the ground, does that portion, goes in the bin. He hauls a massive truck to whatever terminal, and it goes through the whole entire food complicated system for that. But this day and age, it's a lot of massive, almost monopolized food processing. So both for grains and commodity crops, and for butchering facilities, and even the farming in just like chicken barns or whatever. It's almost monopolized. I always think of the Hutterites. You cannot compete with a Hutterite now, or it's very difficult. They are just so big, so efficient. Like, all their buildings, they make out of solid concrete, like the walls, everything. State-of-the-art equipment from Germany for all their chicken stuff, like multi millions and millions of dollars. And the quota system for their eggs and their meat birds is astronomical. I think like you're allowed 300 or 299 laying hens without a quota where I am at, and 1,000 meat chickens per year without a quota. If you need a quota, it is literally, I've heard somewhere between like $400 and $600 per bird just for the quota, just to have the bird. So that's not land infrastructure, the bird itself, just the quota to give you the rights to have that bird or whatever in the system. But he with the infrastructure is going to win this thing. Or it's not a game of, well, I guess it kind of is just excelling at life or whatever. But when things go bad, not necessarily Mad Max bad like everybody fantasizes about, and bushcrafting in the bush. I'm talking about the worst depression anyone's ever seen in the West, or hyperinflation like has happened in other countries, but this happening in major Western countries and things. That's a more likely scenario. That's like an inevitable scenario, not Mad Max type of stuff. So, taking back control of your food. So it's not feasible really doing much of farming anything, honestly. You have to be in this system big, with lots of land, lots of equipment, lots of head of cattle, and it's almost specialized farming. So one person does this, just egg laying chickens, and the next farm is just a dairy farm and things. And I'm bringing back this concept of it's a homestead on steroids. So I have a long-term vision of what I'm setting up. It's kind of a micro community, Hutterite style ish, but somebody has to start this thing, right? So if I'm going to go bigger into goats, like my plan here, so do a bigger barn, a good enough barn that I can comfortably have 2 goat kiddings a year instead of just one, because our climate is so cold. And again, if you're listening to me and you don't live in an extreme harsh climate like I do, and you can do things outside, it is so incredibly simple, or much simpler than what we have to deal with here. There's chicken groups. People were like, it's going to get to plus 1 degree Celsius, like almost freezing. Should I put heat lamps and a heater in my chicken coop? It's like my chicken coop's just really, really well insulated. It has a passive solar window. They have lots of bedding. And when it's minus 50 out, those chickens like survive. They don't go outside, obviously, but they survive. They stop laying for the most part in that extreme part of the winter, but they survive. And people living in, less harsh conditions, like in the United States and things, like they're worried that their chickens are going to have trouble when it's not even barely freezing, right? So with infrastructure, eventually I'm going to build a barn, and it's going to be a pretty decent, well-insulated barn. Multi-use for all sorts of different livestock, and hopefully keep it above freezing, just with insulation and passive solar stuff. Same types of concepts as my greenhouse, where I won't have to deal with like rabbit line and livestock waters freezing and things, but not have it so closed up like they need fresh air, so it's not stuffy in there. I'm kind of working this out in my head, based on my experience with the greenhouse and other buildings and stuff. But if you have a super insulated barn that doesn't have a lot of input costs, and you have that, when something comes up, a deal on like everybody's getting out of the average age of a farmer is like 60 years old, and not very many young people are getting into actually farming. So the Hutterites, for instance, even will phone me as they're looking for deals for meat and things. Like, hey, this guy's completely getting out of goats. Are you interested in like getting the females or something? I'm like, I'm not quite set up for that. This guy's getting out of sheep and like really good prices. He just wants out. He's done. Like retiring. Everybody's like retiring and nobody's there to replace. And the Hutterites and the big corporate farms just kind of like expand and get bigger. But I'm not set up to have like a big enough herd to overwinter just because of my climate. Like goats are hard to raise. Cattle's a little bit easier. Sheep as well. But once you have that infrastructure in place and waterers and a place for them and corrals and things that's low maintenance. You can, take advantage of these deals or get livestock and put them in there. If you have the proper haying equipment, you can, keep that shedded so you don't overwork it. You make sure that all of your machines are working good. You pull it out, check over the machine, go do the job, pressure wash it off, check everything, and put it back in the shedded area. And you have that for long term. And you have the equipment that allows you to get the hay, and then you need to put the hay somewhere to store it. So you need a shed for that, right? But he who has all of these concepts set up is the person that's going to survive. So you could have all the skills. Like, I know how to raise chickens. It's like, well, that's great. But do you have like land, building, feeders, waterers, the area to do it and things? Like skills are awesome, and that's very, very important, but the infrastructure is more important. Butchering animals. So if I get into livestock as I progress, and I'm talking like this is 5, 10, 15 year lifelong, multi-generational even plan that's how my mind works. I don't think short term ever. But if you do a really clean butcher facility, so it's got 3 compartment stainless sinks, all plumbed in, sloping concrete, drain basins, meat tracks above, all the different meat hooks, both for me, I can butcher a rabbit. So I just utilized YouTube, some videos, some guy in Africa or something he's really good at doing rabbits. And I learned from that, and you get a special meat hook that makes life easier. Or I was just using paracord or string and things, but I was pretty fast, like under 5 minutes, rabbit, full blown, done. But what I needed to be able to do that was a super clean space, a place to hang the animal, and a sink underneath, a hose at my ready, like hanging in the right spot. And I could get these rabbits down to 2 minutes to do a rabbit, start to finish, like everything. But all of that is infrastructure. So I don't know if you've tried, been out hunting or whatever, and you can do it in the field, but if you don't have water, a hose, you don't have a proper knife, like the actual specific to that task knife for that, the sink under it, a place where you're not freezing or you're not cooking, a place that's free of bugs and flies, and a fast cooler to get it into. Like, it's hard to do in the field without any infrastructure. So you have all that set up, but a walk-in cooler. So my walk-in cooler I built with a product called a CoolBot controller, and it was pretty expensive. This little controller is about $500 when I got it, and I have 2 of them actually. A mobile unit in a enclosed insulated trailer that I built, and then a small 8x8 one in my shop. But I'm going to probably sell that 8x8 one, and it's 6 inches of solid foam. I over insulate everything. But anyways, this CoolBot controller, it fools LG digital air conditioner to go down to refrigeration temperatures. So what it means is you buy this controller, you set it up properly, and for a $200 used LG air conditioner, you have a walk-in cooler. It uses less electricity than a full-blown reefer unit that would be like $1,500 used, plus paying a refrigeration guy to install it and check it. And then if you have any problems with that, expensive to run, like it's expensive on electricity too, though these walk-in coolers, like actual reefer units, expensive on electricity. But if you have a problem with it, you can expect $1,500 minimum to have a reefer guy come out and buy 2 parts and put it in with his expertise. Whereas my walk-in cooler I've had for 7 years or something, and the air conditioner this spring crapped out on it. So what I did is I went on my local marketplace and I gave somebody $250 or something, and I took out the old air conditioner, put it back in, up and running, boom, like super cheap. So if you have a walk-in cooler, a place to hang meat, you can sell people better meat. If you have tracking, you're not breaking your back. If you have proper tables, if you have all the different knives, and of course the skills of how you do all that. If you have the sink, if you have a electric pressure washer or good water pressure and drains, it makes for easier cleaning. If it's just endless. He who has that set up is going to be miles and miles ahead. Like, as the price of building material maybe goes way up and it's harder to build anything, whoever has those systems set up ahead of time are going to be, miles up and miles. Nobody else can touch you if you think of it as my mind works as a capitalist free market. You want to be able to provide people the best product for the least cost, right? And so that walk-in cooler, I don't have a huge electricity bill compared to a reefer unit, right? Things like that. My buildings, I'll put more insulation in. It's more money up front, but I'm playing a long game. So again, just insulation and any building, like a passive solar building or super insulated building, that's infrastructure as well. You don't need 12 cords of firewood a year. You need 1 cord of firewood a year or 2. You're going to have a much better time in whatever's coming in the future. Hyperinflation or Great Depression or hard times or good times, whatever. It's just good to have that infrastructure. My greenhouse, for instance, the amount of money on material I put into it, and don't even account for my own labor in it. It's a labor of love kind of thing. But for the same dollar value that I got into that greenhouse, I could have done hoop houses, 30 times the size of my greenhouse or 20 times the size of my greenhouse. But those hoop houses, it only extends your season a few weeks, couple weeks in the spring, couple weeks in the fall, kind of thing. So it's sure you have these hoop houses, then you have to replace the poly, and it's a lot of poly to replace. If you're going to extend your growing season more than what it would naturally do, you have a massive, massive heating bill. But mine, it's kind of like a large scale homestead thing that's, super insulated. So it's barely got bills attached to it on an ongoing basis. And that's just my brain working. I'm able to produce something with not massive ongoing costs to it. So having that infrastructure, all set up. So this is why I spend so much time figuring out my rainwater collection system and try to make it gravity fed and try to use just figuring out these fish that I'm really having a great time learning about. The most efficient pump, right? Not oversizing the pump, just the right amount so you're not wasting electricity and things, and figuring out the different species. So like on an ongoing basis, I think of chickens, so I don't do grains and things, but grains are readily available if other farmers are still able to get wheat and things like that. But chickens, you have to feed, chicken feed, right? Whereas everything else I'm doing is goats are hay. The breeds of pigs I'll end up doing are just hay. Cows are hay, like grass fed. So out in the pasture or in the winter, good quality bales. And I can do all that myself for a relatively low cost for what I get out of it. Rabbits are good quality hay. They don't need anything else, right? You're going to have a better quality meat. You're not going to be fake fattening them up with grains like a feedlot would do at the end of a cow's life just to get more weight to it. But you have less weight, but a better quality meat, and for not huge feed costs, right? But all this is infrastructure setting up. So I look at when I bought bare land, you come out here and it's desolate. It is scarce. There's nothing. First, you have to build something, and something just to store the tools that you need to build the next thing. And it's really interesting. It's scarcity, scarcity, scarcity. And I'm just like on the cusp of the transition between scarcity and abundance type of thing. I can see these things, like things get easier. I have things in place. Goats, for instance, you barely have to do anything with goats. I check them once in a while. The only thing they get is ivermectin for them, but all summer for 7 months of the year, just a nice fresh water, and they're just doing they have a route around my big pasture, right? And they keep the pasture nice. There's not too many goats on it that they eat it down too far, but they go around in the morning, do a loop, come back for a little nap, do another loop, this other route that they have, go have a nap on this hill underneath this tree, and they're living their best goat life, right? And because it's all set up, the infrastructure and the fence and the right size of pasture and things, that it reduced my ongoing workload to nothing for 7 months of the year, almost nothing. And it's like where I'm at with the super insulated building in the wintertime, it's the same type of concept. It's reduce my workload, have a healthier animal, and it's all in the infrastructure. It's no skills on my part. I needed the knowledge and skills to assemble infrastructure. And past that, you don't even need a lot of skills to do it. So for me, like, sometimes I consider myself the architect of the things that I'm doing. It's the entrepreneurial or free market mind. You're the architect. So you have to be the first guy that suffers, whether it's for a business or your homestead or your family or something. Be the guy that suffers and sets it up and figures it out and builds the thing and has the thing. And then from the thing, you make a system within that thing, like all the infrastructure, all in the right place. And then you could literally hire, somebody that doesn't know anything about it with like a set of 5 instructions on it. And they could, take over or manage that entire system that you created for very minimal amount of time, and anybody could do it. But somebody had to set up the system to begin with, and that's the infrastructure to it. So apple trees, that's infrastructure. Like, that is infrastructure. A well, that is infrastructure. So if you did test holes, got somebody to witch you a well, you spent the time and the money and put the well in, that's infrastructure. Solar panels and a proper system like that. So maybe it's a grid tie, and then you have a smaller battery backup just for essential stuff, just in case the grid goes down. But if you grid tie it and eliminate your electricity bill, then it doesn't matter how bad inflation or hyperinflation gets. It's still a wash kind of thing. So you don't have that bill, but that's infrastructure. Insulation is infrastructure. Concrete floor painted black in a greenhouse is infrastructure. Rainwater collection tanks, gravity fed with proper simple filtration. That's all gravity. Nothing. You don't have to do anything once it's set up. That's infrastructure. And then you have pressurized water and clean water to water plants. That's all infrastructure. And he who sets all of this up ahead of time is going to, not only just not be in survival mode, but you're probably going to thrive. if you commit to it and get far enough set up with everything. So it's not just, that's why I think one of my podcasts was the optimistic pessimist or something. I'm pessimistic for everything as a whole, and I'm really optimistic when I turned hyper inward, and then hyper inward, make my bed first, figure that out, and then I just work outward a little bit, and optimism on the inside and pessimistic, like literally outside of my gates is pessimism and inside of my homestead is optimism. So how about the infrastructure of living accommodations for someone else? Let's say someone else is having a really hard time. They lost their job. There's no jobs available. They have an apartment. They can't afford that apartment anymore. Well, you know what? I got infrastructure in place. I have a barn, and we have a small goat operation, and chickens and pigs and meat birds and turkeys and ducks and rabbits and greenhouse and outdoor orchards and indoor aquaponics and outdoor fish ponds and different gardens and baling and things. Okay, that's great. When hard times come, you have to be the sacrificial person to try to set up this infrastructure for everybody that's not listening to you, or everybody that, doesn't have your drive. And you have to set up living accommodations for someone else. So imagine offering, let's just talk about the previous Great Depression, where there's no jobs, people are homeless, there's bread lines, life kind of sucked for the majority of people. And you kind of made sacrifices ahead of time, and you set up this thing that I'm talking about. But then you had bunk houses or something, like well-insulated bunk houses with a bunk bed and a decent mattress and linens, and pretty simple. An outhouse or your septic system already plumbed in and hooked up. Really simple. And, you could just have it there just in case. And whoever's coming out, or a farm helper, or even an employee, let's say it's good times or something, and you find your first employee or second or 10th or whatever, and you can offer them a place of residence that's really nice. I did a whole YouTube on community building where I analyzed all this stuff, like Yellowstone Ranch TV show there, how they have the cowboys in the bunkhouse and the cowboys work on the ranch and the cowboys like their life, and how all this works, and how the Hutterites work. And it's the infrastructure, right? That cowboy can't just go be a cowboy and manage cows if he doesn't have a place to live, like the Yellowstone Ranch is remote. If the Hutterites had all this production, but they didn't have, a kitchen area and a root cellar and a place for all of the members of this colony to live, then, that colony's not going to do well. You need all this infrastructure in place. So just having these living accommodations is going to be huge. So, and it could be pretty primitive, like not 80 or 100 years ago. Farm workers would work for meals, maybe a couple extra bucks on the side, and it's literally a 8x10 shack with a little wood stove, no insulation, really drafty, but it was just for the traveling men, farm workers, the young men, and they were fine with that, as long as they got a hot meal off the farm and things. And that's literally 80 or 100 years ago. So we're so spoiled rotten now. Even in my brain, I have to take it back a notch for how spoiled I am and I think, right? Because when it's survival time and bad times, it's no more luxuries. It's kind of the bare minimum. So you can try to work through that exercise, but there's, it's far-fetched to think you're gonna, all these bushcrafting preparedness guys and the ultimate little all-in-one knife, hatchet, and hammer thing. That's silly. I'm going to go out in the bush and chop some trees and put some grass and make a lean-to, and when it's minus 50 outside, and burn a whole bunch of wood and have to consume a whole whack of calories to stay warm. Like those, it's not feasible. Do it ahead of time. Put in the infrastructure in place, and you have modern insulation, modern building materials, modern tin, modern, rainwater collection tanks, high efficient wood stoves. If you're thinking that you're going to like go bushcraft yourself a lean-to thing, maybe it makes more sense to, put together a little 8x8 ice shack instead, or I don't know, whatever point you're at or whatever your thinking is. But, an 8 foot by 8 foot ice shack, it's long enough you could sleep on a bench. It's small enough you barely need any wood, and that's a heck of a lot better having a few sheets of plywood than a stick and grass lean-to structure, right? And it comes down to just he who has stuff like that is infrastructure. He who has the garden soil, the right soil, he who has drip lines, he who has a 12-volt water pump with one solar panel connected to it, he who has watering cans. How about 5-gallon pails? How about screws and nails and tools and hand tools? Like, who has hand tools anymore? Nobody has hand tools. I have hand tools. A hand weeder, who has it's endless. Who has some precious metals? Who has the ability to safely store or hide precious metals? Who has the firearms and the ammunition? Who has all of this infrastructure set up, also has a larger community because you're getting set up already. Who has the ability to protect all that infrastructure? Just as you grow, you get larger, more bodies, more hands, you're more resilient. You could compare things to movies or TV shows like The Walking Dead. So after the fact, nobody's out there like building a building from scratch or a new massive greenhouse from scratch. Or if they are building something, it's like with scrap material because they didn't think of it ahead of time, scrounged up things. It kind of worked half-assed. But when things got bad, nobody's building anything. The people that survived had communities, and they moved to like in that situation of zombies, like literal Walking Dead or whatever, they go to a place that's, got protection first. Like it has concrete walls or 4 walls or a high vantage point or something. And then, further into the series, they go out into the country and live closer to nature, and they set up something that's already partially fortified, and then they can just make adjustments with the scrap material. But he who has the fuel, he who has the horses, he who has the hand tools, he who has, I guess, the skills. But in relation to what I'm talking about, infrastructure, he who has that set up is going to be well better off. And, in the comments, like, well, that's a nice greenhouse. I hope you're able to protect it. It's like, you're thinking Mad Max, you watching too many Hollywood movies type of thing. Let's just go for the inevitable. This is going to be Great Depression or hyperinflation. Like, I don't know if you knew this, but Zimbabwe is still around. Venezuela, most people are still alive. Like 99% of them. Not too many people died. Everybody lost like 30 pounds on average, which is probably much needed, just like in the West. But guess what? Things just, it's still working. And I guarantee you, he with the infrastructure in Venezuela, he who had the chicken barn, he who was raising turkeys, he who was raising fish in a pond, the price of the fish went from, $4 a fish to, $4 million a fish. But he had the fish, right? What is money? Money is, well, we have currency. You can't value things in dollars anymore with this amount of inflation. He who has the stuff, and what is that stuff worth? And you could, if you think gold is money, gold and silver are money, then like what can an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver buy you? Can it buy you a fish? Can it buy you 10,000 fish? What can the fish buy you? Can the fish like buy you lumber? Can you trade for lumber? Like, because currency is just a medium of exchange. It's not money. And with the inflation that we have, and that's probably coming, well, it is coming, that's not money. You can't think of it that way. He who has the infrastructure, the production capabilities, being economically viable, it doesn't matter what currency it is. Once you get all the infrastructure set up and you're producing something with not a lot of overhead costs, not a lot of risks. So that's why hyper-local, I think, is the way to go and important, and direct to customers. You eliminate your middlemen. You are very, very resilient and set up. So it doesn't matter if it's depression or hyperinflation. And make sure you're in an industry like food that people can't go without, right? Like why I switched to food. I might have talked about this before, but in real estate, one of the houses that I sold was a rental property. 2-bedroom house, 14 people moved into it. Okay. And that stuck with me. It's like, okay, well, is there a housing shortage? No, there is not. 2-bedroom house, 14 people are living in there comfortably. Okay. Can those 14 people share 2 plates of food? No, they can't. Right. Food, energy, make sure you're in the right industry, make sure you have the right infrastructure for the right industry. So if you're putting in infrastructure to have a music studio or a hot tub dealership or something, that's probably not a good idea. Like proper infrastructure. So let me know what you thought of that rant. Let me know your ideas. 10 million different ways a guy could play this. And I just think economically viable, in the right industry, hyper local, direct to customers, self-sufficiency, high efficiency, frugality is going to get you in a very resilient position for the inevitable things coming. Now, in the Mad Max type things, or the asteroid hitting the Earth, you're also in a better position too. So when you're prepared for one thing, then you're prepared for everything. You guys take care. We'll talk to you next time.